Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
Welcome to this week's Painting of the Week. A slight departure from normal. I'm not with Laura today. I'm with a friend of mine called Danny Pike, who is the presenter of BBC's Radio Sussex's Breakfast Time show, which, if you haven't heard, even if you don't live in Sussex, I recommend it. It's great. And Danny has very kindly talked about our films in the past on air, so I'm slightly reversing the tables here by having Danny come in to look at a painting with me in Brighton's Royal Pavilion, which is the most extraordinary building in the heart of Brighton. If you've ever been to Brighton, you'll know what I'm talking about. It looks like a mini Taj Mahal. It's got a most remarkable history, but it has also a most remarkable collection. And right now they have a wonderful painting, which, and I'm going to get the title exactly right, it's Colliers unloading on Hove Beach, looking towards Shoreham, Brighton, 1824-1826, by John Constable. And this painting was unknown to scholars. It was in a private collection, came up for auction, was bought by a guy called Danny Katz, who is a collector and gallerist, the Danny Katz Gallery, I believe it's called. But he's a Brighton boy, as he calls self-defines himself as a Brighton boy. So he's lent the painting that he now owns to the Royal Pavilion. It's been here for a couple of years. Not quite sure how much longer it will be here for, so I'd get down and have a look at it. But we're very fortunate because it's here, it's on the wall, and I'm with Danny, and we're going to talk about it for the next 10 or 15 minutes. So, Danny, welcome to Painting of the Week.
Thanks, Phil. This is unfamiliar territory because you're asking the questions. But I'm going to ask questions about you for knowledge of this painting and of Constable. But the first thing I spotted, just in the bottom right-hand corner there, while lots of the foreground would have changed over the years, looking along the beach westward, out towards what would now be Worthing and beyond, you get a little glimpse of the Downs. Yeah. So everything else might change, but the Downs is always there. And that's a very similar kind of view that you would see now with that little rise in the distance.
Don't you feel that often when you look at landscape paintings, or just out in the landscape, you think, this hasn't changed. And no matter what we as humans do to the planet, the mountains and the hills pretty much are going to stay the same. I mean, there's a timelessness to the Downs, isn't there?
Yeah, there's no Shoreham Power Station, which local people will be familiar with, but it's down towards the beach there and all the other things. And the beach obviously has changed massively, but that little bit of the Downs still there today.
A little curve. And I wouldn't have noticed unless you'd pointed it out, but I'm sure that kind of little elevation is Chanctonbury Hill, which people will know if they're local.
Famous ring of trees at the top. Yeah. Great spot.
And then this is on Shoreham Beach. And what we're looking at here is two coal ships, Colliers, that have been deliberately beached, of course, so they can unload their coal. I guess there wasn't a dock as such. Like these days, you've got Shoreham docks, which are actually very popular and very important to the city and locally. These ships would have deliberately grounded themselves, and then if you look really closely, bottom middle of the painting, you can see, I'm not even sure what you would call it really, but they're offloading the coal, and it's going to be taken off by that horse.
Is it a horse and cart?
It's a horse and cart, basically.
Just right in front of the bow of that ship, yeah.
And the coal will go off because, of course, everyone's heating their homes and businesses with coal at this time, clearly. 200
years ago, exactly, really, he started this painting.
200 years ago. Coal, we've only just banned coal, haven't we, in domestic houses. I guess in the 50s and 60s it started to be used less. But certainly at this time, the city of Brighton, for example, is being run on coal.
Where have they sailed from, do you think? 'Cause they're old wooden ships with, they've both got two masts with the sails sort of horizontally across them, haven't they? They're all rolled up. Where have they come from then?
I'm only guessing. I would imagine that they've come down the east coast. Yeah. So the the mines up in the Midlands, Yorkshire. Coal's taken, where are we, 1824? I guess it's still taken by horse and cart largely. We're slightly pre-trains, are we? Taken to the ports and then loaded up. And these colliers must have been just going around the country, up and down, until the railways, until the canals are really established. This was the way you transported coal. I guess, alternatively, and I've no idea if this is true, they could have come across from France. I guess we had enough of our own coal mines, we probably wouldn't have done that.
Some of the French companies operate our energy generation here now, so
exactly.
Why would it be different 200 years ago?
Exactly. Why is Constable down in Brighton? I mean, that's an interesting story. He's famously from Suffolk, and there's some beautiful paintings. I mean, here's one of the great British artists, of course, and his paintings, Dedham's, where he's brought up, the famous 6-footers, like the Hay Wain for one. Famously, he paints Salisbury Cathedral. Lives in London. I think he had a house on Charlotte Street. I know he's buried in Hampstead, but he has this love story. I think it's a love story. He falls in love with a woman called Maria, wants to marry her. Her grandfather, I guess her own father had died, so her grandfather was really anti it. He considered Constable to be kind of lower ranking in society. Mm-hmm. Constable's own parents said, well, we can't support you, do what you have to. But anyway, long story short, they marry. I think he's about 40 or 41 when they get married. Is that right? Maybe a bit earlier. But sadly, she develops tuberculosis. And they decide to come to Brighton for health reasons. They think that the air, I mean, again, maybe this is to do with slightly less coal pollution in the air, but they think it's healthier down here. So he moves down here. He's not terribly fond of Brighton. He refers to it as being as busy as London, calls it Piccadilly by the sea, so many coaches and gigs, but he does admire the sea. He absolutely loves landscapes and seascapes. He loves painting nature. And they live, again, if you live in Brighton, you might know this road, in Hove, rather, called Silwood, number 11 Silwood Road. I think there's a blue plaque there now. They're here for 4 years. Doesn't really help her, ultimately. And I think she dies in 1829, maybe, age 41. Anyway, that's why he's here. And he does go up and backwards and forwards to London a bit, but this is obviously one of the paintings from that period. There's another very famous painting where he's looking east, isn't he? Yeah, the chain.
The old chain pier.
The old chain pier. Yeah. Which, my understanding of the old chain pier is that's where they docked. That's where there were ships that would then go off to France.
Because that give you the deeper water then, wouldn't it? And then you could go off, bring the bigger ships there.
But then you do wonder why these ships don't use the chain pier.
Yeah. Because, I mean, they're big boats to beach and then pull up out the water.
Maybe somebody could contact us and explain, because, I mean, just sailing, I mean, I guess with your sails up, you could sail straight onto the beach, but how are they going to get it off? Unless the wait for a southerly wind.
Lots of people with muscle, I reckon. But look, I mean, in the water, there are several other ships around and about out on the water, so it was a busy shipping scene. You certainly don't see boats this big or this close to the beach now. They go into the harbour. And you'll tell me about this. The colours that he's using this. There's a lot of quite darks and browns in this. There's just a couple of flashes of colour. Why do you think that is?
So it's always a little bit difficult to answer that question, because you don't know to what extent colours might have deteriorated over the years. You also don't know, this wasn't his primary studio, so it might partly just have been what he had to hand, or it might have been a deliberate choice to be quite muted, because, I mean, clearly the sky is quite grey.
Yeah, it's not the best day, is it?
I mean, it's basically like we've had for the last 5 months, which is just endless grey skies and rain. There are little dabs of red. I mean, often what you'd find with an artist like Constable is that he deliberately uses, Turner's another one, they'll use little spots of red just to prick things out or to drive your eye in a certain direction. I mean, there is a kind of a pyramid to this, which with the sails, which is a kind of classic painter's trick of adding structure to something. What you don't see so much here, sometimes you can look at a painting and you can really see how the artist is controlling your eye and deliberately telling you where to look and where to look next. And sometimes that involves the lines, and sometimes that involves dabs of white paint, because your eye is always drawn to something lighter. I don't really see that here so much. I guess when you come to the painting, and it's not in particularly high light here, I guess you'd look... I mean, that sail on the left of the smaller boat is quite odd, really, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's fully pulled up, so I guess it's facing into the wind.
And it is a big block of kind of browny...
Yeah.
Kind of smudges of brown.
But definitely the first thing you pick up is the two coal ships for a start.
Yeah.
But then there's quite a lot of space on the right for more cloud and like the bits of the downs we were talking about earlier.
But it's almost drawing your eye away from the coal ships to the whitest part of the sky, which is top right. Maybe the idea is that brings you then down to look to the distance.
It's not as busy as Brighton Beach is these days.
No, and is it clear that it's pebbles? Not really.
No.
Not really. And it clearly would have been back then. That hasn't changed.
And where was this?
It's also very ambitious. I mean, again, he's. I mean, one of the things where he was painting 6-footers, as they're called, was a deliberate attempt to, he wanted to paint big canvases, partly to make a statement, but partly to allow himself to express the way he wanted to interpret nature. This is a big canvas. And I'm sure it wasn't a commissioned work. I'm sure he's just doing it for himself. And the fact it goes into a private collection, I don't know when it was bought, and he did struggle to sell his paintings in his own lifetime. But where this was on his death, I don't know.
So they've got it listed here as Constable in Brighton, an unseen masterpiece at the Royal Pavilion. So where do you think this sits in his work overall?
It's a good question, that. I think sometimes we want to call a painting a masterpiece because it is by a great artist. And if you didn't know who the artist... I mean, I always think you need to think to yourself, OK, if one didn't know who the artist was, so you don't have that background, would you look at the painting and consider it a masterpiece? I'll give you an alternative story. So I once went into an art gallery where there were photographs on the wall. There were landscape photographs, and they were £20,000 each. Mm-hmm. And I happened to know the owner, or one of the owners of the gallery, and I said, I really could use some money. Times are tough. I can take pictures as good as that. If I take 8 or 10 really nice landscapes, beautiful black and white, big prints, nicely framed, will you sell them for me? He said no. I said, well, what's the difference? My photographs will be as good as those. He said, you don't have a name. So sometimes it's not actually the quality of the artwork, it's the association with the name. So, clearly, we are drawn here today because it is a Constable. That doesn't automatically make it a masterpiece.
But it's of Brighton, and it's in Brighton, and it's owned by a Brighton lad, as you said before, so there's lots of local boxes ticked.
But then we have to look at it and think to ourselves, okay, if we didn't know who the artist was, would we look at this and think it's a great artwork? Actually, I think it is pretty impressive. I mean, I'm always slightly impressed because I don't paint, and I think that's very skilled. It's one of those paintings where the more you look at it, there's a pause there because I'm having a good close look. The more you look at it, the more actually there is to see, and I think the more impressive it becomes.
The rigging, the crow's nest, all the rolled up sails, lots of little detail in there.
There's a lot of life there, isn't there?
But also, it tells a story of how we powered our homes 200 years ago, and the toil it took to these boats up onto the beach and unload the coal and ship it off to wherever.
I think from a historical point of view, it's very interesting. And I mean, Constable was one of these artists that actually he wanted to paint daily life. He thought there was something wonderful in. You think of the Haywain, or you think of those types of paintings. Just ordinary people going about their work. We've just finished a film about John Singer Sargent, who's an absolute. He's unbelievably good as an artist, but he's painting the elite in their fine costumes and their ball gowns and their coats and their whatever. Constable, what you've got here, and this is Constable's not an impressionist exactly, but at the same time, or maybe where are we, 1824, coming down the line, 1874 is the first Impressionist exhibitions, that's 50 years later. But you've also got wonderful Impressionist paintings of men unloading coal on the Seine. They too start to look at daily life. When the Franco-Prussian War broke out in France in 1870, there were a number of artists, French artists, that came to Britain to escape that. And they'd never seen Turner or Constable before, and they were absolutely astounded and were definitely influenced. So you can see how somebody who becomes or is already what we call an impressionist painter, looking at this and thinking that it's not realistic as such, is it? It's not photorealistic. So actually, where I think it's very impressive is the background. The clouds are amazing.
It's a busy sky, isn't it?
But beautifully rendered. Imagine if we tried to do that, it would just be,
Well, I wouldn't bother, because I couldn't. I mean, I work in audio, so, that is about layering up sound sometimes and all the techniques. What would you tell us about the kind of painting techniques and the use of colour in this?
The painting techniques. Well, there is a, partly progressing from what I was just saying, there is in the middle of the 19th century, this is quite early in the 19th century, they are moving away from... First of all, they're starting to change the subject matter. So, these are ordinary people at work. That's interesting in itself. There's also a sense of not necessarily trying to do something that is... this is as far from Canaletto as you can imagine. Canaletto is like a draftsman. He's almost telling you that this is what we would now call photorealistic. That's not what Constable is about. It's not what Turner is about. They're trying to convey emotion through their art. So he's gone down to the beach and he's trying to convey the emotion of that heavy rain-sodden sky on the day and this grind. This is not glamorous work, They've had to beach these colliers wherever they've come from, Northumberland or somewhere, and they've got to unload it, and then they've got to pull that horse and cart across the pebbles, take it off to the houses and shops of Brighton. There's a lot of activity in the background. I don't think they're at play. I think those are people who are fishing or...
No, it's definitely a work scene. This is a popular painting, Phil. Since we stood here, there have been some groups go by, and everybody's stopping to look at this particular picture. Don't let me interrupt you taking that photo. You're right. Where have you come from?
Well, we live in Sheffield, so we've just come down for a couple of weeks with our caravans.
You've seen a Constable here in Brighton. How about that?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Do you like it?
That's a tricky question.
Would you have it at home?
I wouldn't have it at home, but I appreciate the skill in it.
I think you might be onto something there. I think that might be what a lot of people think of this. That's a fair point, isn't it, Phil?
Well, anyone's opinion is a fair point. It's interesting that often when we do the Painting of the Week podcasts, we always say we'd have that painting in our living room. So...
Would you, Phil, then? Would you have that? Well, yes, because then you could say you got a Constable, but it's about how it makes you feel, how it fits into your
I mean,
life, what it says about you.
I wouldn't need to work again, would I?
Fair enough.
I think I'm attracted to it more because of living in Brighton.
Yeah.
So there's a real association there in Brighton Beach, and I do like it. I do, but I think the paintings that he does, I mean, I know they're slightly bucolic, but the paintings he does up in Suffolk are really stunning. I do think he's a master painter. I should say, by the way, it's a bit late now, 20 minutes into the podcast, but I should remind people, of course, that if you want to see the painting, if you go to the website, 7th-art.com, and press on the podcast button there, you can see the painting, or the YouTube channel that we have, you can see the painting. It is a painting that was apparently unknown to even Constable'S scholars until very recently, which is quite extraordinary, actually. I'm taking that as read. I don't know that's gospel. I don't know if that's true. It's just what it says on the sign here. That's quite extraordinary for a constable to have basically disappeared into a private collection, and for there to be no image of it, no public knowledge of it, and then it comes back on the market. I'm very surprised that it wasn't bought by a gallery. The list price that I saw at Sotheby's was actually, I think, pretty low, but I don't know what it actually went for.
What was that, in the kind of hundreds of thousands, or?
Well, it said, unless I misunderstood it, it said it was £200,000 to £300,000, but I do hesitate even to recount that because it seems so low for a constable. So I could be wrong.
But it's also that moment in time, wasn't it, when him and his wife were living here for a period of time. Obviously, that would be a traumatic period of time for them because she was unwell and died. So it's that local connection. It's in the Royal Pavilion, which is an extraordinary building. If you do come here and see the painting, always go to the music room here because it is the most glorious, opulent, decadent, crazy room. You've got to see it, but it's beautiful, isn't it? It's so well kept.
It's one of those things where, being Brighton resident, you can forget to visit it yourself. Yeah. It's the most amazing, extraordinary building.
This series of buildings, the pavilion itself, the museum, the dome, which was George IV's sort of stables, working area for the horses, which is now that great concert venue, the Corn Exchange next door, which has been renovated, and they've done a beautiful job on that, exposed all the wooden ceilings, and then a studio theatre. So that series of buildings in this central part of Brighton, which you see in this huge panorama over here from 1824, you can see the pavilion in it there.
You'll have to come to the pavilion to see that one.
That's a painting for another week.
It is amazing though. It's very long and narrow, and it's about 12 foot wide, and just showing the seafront of Brighton in 1824. It's funny 1824 keeps popping up because I'm just this week finishing a film called My National Gallery, which is to be released to mark the 200th anniversary of the National Gallery, which started in 1824. So completely by coincidence, you've got Constable here in 1824, that particular picture, which you've just said is 1824. There's a fantastic story about the Royal Pavilion, which I know you'll know, Danny, but some of the people listening to this might not know. Because of the nature of the building, it looks a bit like an Indian, almost, people call it like a Brighton's Taj Mahal, don't they? In the First World War, where we had a lot of South Asian soldiers fighting on our side, if you like, who were injured on the Western Front, they were brought back here because it was thought that it would make them feel more comfortable, to be somewhere that felt a bit more like home because of the outward appearance of the building. Some of them sadly died, and there's a wonderful memorial on the South Downs called the Chattree.
Yeah, which you can see from so many parts of the city. If you go over here, you can suddenly see this white dot on the horizon. You know what it is. It's around here.
That's great. And also, I do wonder, when you were just talking about his wife, I mean, that was a difficult period. You know, he's in love with this woman, and she's very ill.
How many kids they have?
Had 7 children, which also must have contributed to her ill health. And also, they've got 7 children running around. They're not terribly wealthy, so whether they had nursemaids and. One of the questions that came up with the Vermeer film we made last year was, why did he paint so little? Yeah, we had like 15 kids, and 11 of them survived. I don't know what it was, can't remember now, but that's a lot of kids.
It keeps you busy.
That takes up a lot of time. And I wonder whether the colours are rather muted here because that was his mood. I mean, and sometimes it's a conscious decision, sometimes it's a subconscious decision of an artist, but ultimately the art that one creates does reflect your own inner feelings, doesn't it? So it's not a bright sunny day full of colour. This is a
tough scene.
It's a rather sad painting in some ways, isn't it? So, Danny, thank you very much for coming straight after your show. I know you've been up since like 3:30 this morning.
Not at all. Thanks for telling us about a little gem that I didn't know was here. So it was
do you
great
know
to
what?
come
I
and see
bet
and learn a bit more about it.
I reckon 99% of people living in Brighton have no idea that this painting is here and may only be here for another year. I know plenty of people in Brighton won't know that Constable lived here. Yeah. Another great story. The first Impressionist collector in this country, the first person to buy Impressionist paintings, was Brighton-based. An old military chap. Had a little studio not far from here. I mean, it's got a fantastic art history, Brighton, and Constable is a key part of that. Anyway, Danny, thank you very much.
Cheers, Phil. Good to see you, and we'll see you in June talking about your new
my National Gallery.
Next
one.
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at seventh-art.com or contact us by emailing info@seventh-art.com. See you next time.